For Family by Nanuke Date. Chapter 6 The Olive Branch. The Theed Royal Palace was a testament to the Naboo's love of culture and artistic expression, the very proof of civilization's ability to live in harmony with their world. Its many green-domed towers rose up as if out of the rocks themselves, surrounded by lush vegetation and perched atop a plunging cliff face with a multitude of waterfalls cascading down to the rivers below. Whatever Luke had expected to see in the capital of the Emperor's home planet, this wasn't it. "Wow," he said, glued to the wide viewport as they sped towards the majestic building. "Wow," Leia echoed, although she had seen holograms of it in the past. She was still stunned by the beauty of the palace and the flourishing river city radiating out from it. General Madine was silent beside them, but his expression, too, was that of wonder. As they made their way over Theed, they could see flickering movement all over the grounds of the main plaza and surrounding streets. It was only when they approached the palace itself that they realized what they were seeing. Hundreds of humans, Gungans, and various other sentient beings had bravely turned out to welcome the rebel dignitaries and were being held back by lines of stormtroopers. The press was also out in full force, accompanied by numerous media cans zipping every which way on tiny hover motors, recording the extraordinary scene of the people jubilantly waving small alliance flags. "I'm guessing this would be thanks to the Freedom Chronicles?" Luke said in amazement. It had been several days ago that Luke and High Command had been debating the supposed negotiations when an intelligence aide had burst into the conference room and switched on the HoloNet. Imperial Holovision was one of the largest and most influential providers of news and entertainment in the galaxy, but in the middle of a documentary on the distinguished life and tragic end of the late Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin, IHV had inexplicably started broadcasting an anti-imperial holodrama. The Freedom Chronicles, it had said in gaudy letters at the start of the short cartoon depicting an alternate account of the birth of the Galactic Empire and the nature of the rebellion. Whereas official Imperial accounts cited the Jedi Revolt, where the Jedi had attempted to take over the galaxy and thereby necessitated the Great Jedi Purge and a strong empire to maintain a safe and secure society. This animated holodrama portrayed Palpatine as an evil Sith Lord who, as Supreme Chancellor, had himself orchestrated the division between the Separatists and the Old Republic, which had led to the Clone Wars. As the galaxy was ripped apart by his own designs, he had established the Empire and instated himself as the Supreme Galactic Emperor. "The Empire destroyed Alderaan," it had said, showing the beautiful planet being blown to smithereens. "Murdered innocents," accompanied by a tragic depiction of the Gorman massacre. "Enslaved millions," showing species after species of slaves, including Wookiees, Mon Calamari, Yuzum, Kromans, and Twi'leks. "The rebels say no," it had said then, before showing the key rebel figures. They were already famous, or infamous, depending on one's political inclination. But this cartoon portrayed them in an entirely new light. Luke was introduced as Jedi Knight. The legend has begun. Leia as brave hero of the oppressed. Han was the daring captain. Chewbacca was the loyal and mighty Wookiee. And Rogue Squadron was the elite Starfighter Squadron. Various images followed where they protected all manner of sentient beings from the evil and cruelty of the Empire. The holodrama was already in its fourth repetition by the time IHV technicians had been able to regain control of their hijacked broadcast and shut it down, by which time the damage was well and truly done. The HoloNet was plagued with thousands of illegal copies, and numerous still posters had been plastered on billboards throughout the galaxy. Overnight, the short, simple cartoon had turned the former terrorists into galactic heroes in the eyes of previously loyal Imperial citizens, and cast a serious doubt in the minds of trillions of others as to the Empire's credibility. "Whoever it was, I'm just thankful they were on our side," Leia replied. "Can you imagine the damage if they'd supported the Empire?" Chewbacca wailed behind her in agreement. As soon as news of the proposed negotiations had reached the Vulcan, he had promptly dropped their latest search for Boba Fett and flown straight back to the fleet, knowing Leia too well to think she would simply put her hands up and claim it was too risky to get involved. Lando had been adamant that they shouldn't attend. Vader likes to alter deals, he had insisted, no doubt thinking back to Bespin. The Empire, however, had sent the Alliance written agreements on safety and immunity guarantees, and also released a public statement of the same. Despite having no doubt whatsoever that the Empire was plotting some grand deception, High Command had still felt there was little choice in the matter. Not only would their absence have been extremely damaging for the Alliance's public image, but they also needed to attend, even if just to deny the Empire an opportunity to blame the lack of diplomatic negotiations on the Alliance. Besides, except for Luke and Leia, the others had all been curious as to whether their mysterious benefactor, Varikeno, might reveal himself. The Alliance had immediately rejected the prospect of holding the negotiations on Imperial Center, and instead suggested the more public but still revered venue of Palpatine's home planet. After much deliberation, the leaders had decided that Leia and Maideen would attend the opening meeting, accompanied by Luke, as much for additional security as to represent the Jedi. Arrangements had swiftly been made, and Rebel intelligence had taken over the search for the Emperor's hand, so barely 5 days after Vader had first extended the invitation. Here they were. Leia was resplendent in her Alderaan white. She turned to the others as the shuttle landed. "Let's see what this circus is all about, shall we?" Representing the Rebel Alliance to restore the Republic, Her Royal Highness, Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, General Crix Maideen, and Master Jedi Commander Luke Skywalker. The announcement brought everyone's attention to the grand doors as they slid open and the Alliance party entered, backed by Chewbacca and the Alliance security detail. Luke's gaze immediately met those of his father, the obsidian monolith form standing out in sharp relief before the tall windows at the far end of the council room. Luke could count all their encounters and mental communication to date on one hand. And even in such a small number, Vader had veered the full range, from protective father to downright murderous. So, despite their last contact being one of the most promising, Luke had no idea what to expect as they now came face to mask for only the second time. However, barely a moment later, he heard in his mind, "Luke." Vader's joy at seeing his son again seeped through his shielding and washed over Luke, sweeping aside his anxieties in one fell swoop. For that single brief harmonious moment, everything else melted away, and they were quite simply just father and son. "Father," Luke sent back, glad of the hood that helped conceal his totally inappropriate expression of joy and relief. "Representing the fair and just Galactic Empire," the announcement continued, "the Supreme Commander of the Imperial Forces, Lord Darth Vader, and member of the Imperial Ruling Council, Imperial Advisor Lord Ars Dangor. Also in attendance, Her Royal Highness, Queen Calantha." As the resident monarch of Naboo, Calantha stepped forward to offer the opening greeting. "Welcome to the Theed Royal Palace," she said austerely. "The Naboo are most honored that His Imperial Majesty has generously bestowed upon us the privilege of hosting this historic meeting. May the negotiations make fruitful and positive steps towards peace." Although Leia didn't hold the same respect for Calantha as she did several key Naboo monarchs of old, her expression was perfectly neutral as she replied, "We thank you for the welcome, Your Majesty." Calantha accepted the thanks with the slightest inclination of her heavily adorned head. "Now, you must excuse me. Lord Vader has expressed his desire to begin negotiations immediately, so I must depart." The Alliance party nodded politely as the Queen departed frostily from her own council room. Vader and Dangor barely paid her any heed. As soon as the doors had closed behind her, Luke heard his father's voice in his head. "Reach for your lightsaber, son." Luke sensed no danger, either from Vader or from the stormtroopers lining the walls, but he nevertheless mirrored his father's movements and reached for his utility belt. "Why?" "Dangor will be reporting back to the Emperor. It would be beneficial if we appeared to be on hostile terms." Their hands closed around the hilts, but neither of them detached their lightsabers. "How so?" He noticed in his peripheral vision that both Alliance and Imperial parties were tense as they watched the two Force users face off, hands itching to reach for blasters, but nobody wanting to be responsible for the breakdown of the fragile ceasefire. "There isn't sufficient time to explain. For now, you have to take my word for it." "You have a lot of explaining to do," Luke said as he continued to mock and glare at the Sith Lord. "I know, son." They stared each other down for several more seconds, Anakin noticing how the Jedi robes suited his son and wondering at his new lightsaber, before Luke slowly straightened from his defensive stance, and they both eased their hands back down to their sides. Leia looked sharply from one to the other. "Do you recall your guarantees for our safety during these negotiations, Lord Vader?"
"Fear not, Your Highness," Vader rumbled. "Commander Skywalker and I have reached an understanding."
"For the time being," Luke added, playing along and not wanting Dangor to think they were too friendly. The advisor was following their every movement with his hawkish eyes glinting with a touch of insanity. Vader indicated the large oval table before them, and the tension in the room gradually ebbed down. The Imperial and Alliance parties seated themselves on opposite ends, Vader and Leia taking their respective head positions.
"The initial negotiation for peace between the Galactic Empire and the Rebel Alliance is now in session," Dangor announced. "This is a time of grave crisis where the security of our Grand Empire's citizens and member worlds is threatened. The Empire has extended an invitation for civilized discussion, and we are most pleased that the Rebel Alliance has accepted. It gives hope for a return to a more peaceful, just society."
There was a good reason why Dangor often acted as Palpatine's spokesperson, responsible for conveying important messages, such as the dissolution of the Senate, to both the public and the Moffs and Grand Moffs of the Empire. Like Palpatine, he was a charismatic speaker, proficient in employing subtle nuances and owning a voice that invited trust through its expression of absolute conviction. His pale face, framed in a plain dark head covering that matched his plain dark robes, was currently etched in grave concern. Leia utilized her own considerable skills in diplomatic rhetoric as she responded. "The Alliance to Restore the Republic appreciates the Empire hearing our repeated appeals for nonviolent negotiation. It gives hope for a return to a more peaceful, just, and democratic society," she said, amending his own words with subtle emphasis. "Let diplomacy resume." She never knew the effect of those 3 words on the Dark Lord. Anakin was reminded of a moment in Padme's apartment, way back when Imperial Center was still known as Coruscant. As the sun was setting behind them, she had asked him to appeal to the Chancellor to stop the fighting and let diplomacy resume. Sorrow washed over him. "Father, are you all right?" Without turning his head, Anakin glanced at his son. Luke exuded intelligence and calm assurance as he supposedly paid close attention to the opening formality, and Anakin found himself remarkably soothed.
"With you as my son," he replied, "I am more than all right."
Safely concealed within his mask, he grinned outright as he watched Luke struggle to contain a smile. After many hours of cautious opening debate, a joint public announcement by Dangor and Leia to confirm the commencement of negotiations, and a formal dinner with awkward, stilted conversation hosted by the Queen, they had finally been able to sneak away from their respective parties. Vader supposedly meditating in a locked room, and Luke going for a walk to clear his head. Luke had followed the mental call to find his father in a small, isolated veranda gazing out over the landscape. Before them spread lush meadows interspersed with reflective deep blue lakes, stretching far into the distance where they met the green mountain hills rolling gently into the horizon. Although Anakin keenly followed his son's approach through the Force, as if afraid to startle away a timid animal, he remained perfectly still as Luke appeared and paused in the doorway. Luke took in the sight of the armored Sith Lord standing by the decorative balustrade, his large black-gloved hands resting lightly on the stonework. He reached out with the Force to gauge his father's current mood, and when he had finally satisfied himself that Vader was not about to suddenly draw his lightsaber, Luke stepped up next to his father. The sun was beginning to set over Theed, casting the small veranda in warm orange hues as they stood side by side and quietly appreciated simply being together. It wasn't lost on either of them that this was the first time they were meeting peacefully. There was no animosity or false pretenses. No witnesses before whom they had to hide their relationship. Shielded from the prying media cams and far from the bustling sounds of the city and its traffic, only the hiss of the respirator disturbed the idyllic tranquility. How Anakin wished he could remove his mask and speak to Luke with his own voice, to look upon his son with his own eyes. In a way, it seemed somehow fitting to greet his son with his own face, the first time they met properly as father and son. But he knew that such an action only served his own interests, and he flatly refused to impose the detrimental consequences of such selfishness on his son. The mask remained firmly, stubbornly in place. Somewhere in the netherworld of the Force, Anakin could imagine Obi-Wan shaking his head. Having such deep regret about their first encounter, Anakin had thought long and hard about this second meeting. He knew their time together here would be limited, and he needed to make the most of it. The old Vader would most likely have jealously concealed his terrible past so that Luke wouldn't reject him and attempted to keep his son by his side by any means necessary. But he was Anakin now, and the path he walked was guided by different principles. As much as he wanted to be close to his son, it would be Luke's decision whether he wanted his father in his life. And that meant only one thing: the truth, in all its unabridged, horrific entirety. He looked down at his son, memorizing every feature of Luke's face as if he would never see him again. Luke had his hair, his eyes, but Padme's soft features, her nose. Luke met his gaze levelly, curiosity and wariness evident in equal measure in his blue eyes. Anakin looked back towards the distant hills.
When your mother told me she was pregnant, it was the happiest moment of my life.
Luke blinked. Everything about those words was unexpected. Anakin closed his eyes as a crystal-clear image of that conversation welled up inside. Her beautiful face was etched in concern, watching him nervously as she told him. He remembered it as if it had happened yesterday. Their embrace behind one of the many giant columns lining the main hallway of the Republic Executive Building, barely concealed from the delegates welcoming the safe return of the Chancellor. It had been 5 long months since they had last seen each other, and not only had he been greeted by his angel, but also with the wonderful news of their child. With reluctance, he moved on.
But that night, I had a dream. A nightmare, really. And every night, it was the same. Potent dreams. Ever since I had dreamed of my own mother's death in exactly the way it came to pass, I had come to fear them. So when I dreamed that Padme would die in childbirth...
Padme. The name rolled around Luke's thoughts, and he repeated it several times before fondly tucking it away to return to later. He knew even less of his mother than he did the enigma that was his father, but one parent seemed enough to be trying to understand for now. Anakin could still feel his fear and panic at those nightmares, and he physically shook his head as if to shake it off.
I searched for every possible way to save her, but the Jedi could not help. Master Yoda only told me to train myself to learn to let go, warning me that the fear of loss was a path to the dark side. He said that death was a natural part of life, and that I should rejoice for those who transform into the Force. How could I rejoice in losing Padme?
He asked hoarsely, turning to Luke. Luke had no hope of answering that, but he did realize one crucial fact. You loved her, he said in surprise. An observation, not a question.
She was everything, my angel,
Anakin managed to say fervently before he choked up. Luke waited silently as his father visibly brought himself back under control. Even after so many years, the strength of love Luke could feel radiating from Vader was incredible. It made his father appear more human. It was almost a whole minute later before Anakin continued.
It was Palpatine who presented the answer I was looking for.
He laughed sardonically.
A Sith legend, he called it, the tragedy of Dark Plagueis the Wise. He had such knowledge of the dark side, he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying,
he said in mock imitation of Palpatine, as he recalled what he'd heard in that opera house.
I should have known better. But Palpatine was the Supreme Chancellor at the time, and nobody, not even Master Yoda, knew he was Sith. And at the time, I foolishly considered him a mentor and a friend. I was desperate, and I believed him.
He shook his head at his own blandness.
Looking back, I could see that Palpatine had been laying the trap for many years. I had never been a model Jedi Knight. I wanted more than the ordinary life of a Jedi, and I was too arrogant, too angry. He saw straight through me, when he was abducted, at his own scheming, by the Separatist leader, General Grievous, and I went with Obi-Wan to rescue him. We fought with the fallen Jedi, Count Dooku. I had him at my mercy, and Palpatine goaded me to kill him. And I did. I didn't realize at the time that I had been tapping into the dark side to overpower him, and my thoughts were not my own. I only saw him as a threat to peace that needed to be eliminated, and so I killed him in cold blood. I only learned later that Dooku had been Palpatine's apprentice, Darth Tyrannus. He played on my pride, he continued, and made me feel important, such as by appointing me as his personal representative on the Jedi Council. He created a rift between me and Obi-Wan, as well as all the Jedi, in the small things, he said. He questioned the judgment of the Council in not granting me the rank of Master, pointed out the lack of trust in me in not selecting me for critical missions. He gradually turned me against them.
A flock of ducks flew into view, splash landing onto a lake before them, not too far away. Neither of them noticed.
Then Palpatine revealed to me that he was the Sith Lord the Jedi had been hunting for, and he knew of my nightmares, of my fears. Use my knowledge, he said. Know the power of the dark side, the power to save Padme.
Anakin paused, his mind casting back to that dark time.
I went as far as turning him over to the Jedi Council. Master Windu went with Masters Fisto, Golar, and Dinto to arrest him.
He shook his head.
I should never have gone, but I couldn't get his words out of my head. I couldn't bear the thought of losing Padme, and kept thinking how Palpatine would be able to save her. The fool I was.
He turned abruptly away from Luke and paused briefly to contain his self-directed anger.
But I would have done anything to save her. So I followed them to the Chancellor's suite, high up in the Senate building, and just as Windu was about to deliver the final blow, I stopped him. I cut off his hand and Palpatine blasted him out through the window.
His strength seemed to seep out of him and his shoulders drooped.
That was when I knelt to Sidious for the first time and became Darth Vader. That night the Jedi Purge began.
Just at that moment the sun dipped below the horizon, and the light around them abruptly became several shades darker. The balmy warmth of the day also seemed to flee, leaving them with the dusk chill. In a fleeting moment of weakness, Anakin considered not telling Luke after all. It was the worst truth of all, too difficult to voice, and it would be so much easier to skip over it and pretend it had never happened. Maybe it would even be better for Luke not to know just how much of a monster his father was. Would it really matter if Luke never knew? But then the moment passed, and he rebuked himself for his weak-mindedness. It had not been an empty oath when he had sworn that he would do right by his son. Luke deserved the truth. It was only right. Anakin was never to know how this single decision was to affect the future of the entire galaxy. Bracing himself, he took a deep breath.
Palpatine sent me to kill the younglings at the Jedi Temple, and from there the separatist leaders he'd ordered Grievous to send to Mustafar. It was shortly after this that your mother followed me to Mustafar. She'd heard dark rumors of my deeds, and she wanted me to go away with her, to leave everything behind. But I was blind with the dark side, fueled with power. I believed I could overpower Sidious and take over with Padme at my side. No more hiding, no more rules. Everyone would know that she was my wife and that she carried my child, and the galaxy would be ours. But she wanted nothing to do with it. She believed in democracy and wouldn't support my dark ambitions. It made me angry.
He paused.
Then I saw Obi-Wan.
Anakin was visibly trembling now.
As Vader, consumed by the dark side, I couldn't think straight. I thought she had brought him, that he had turned her against me.
He gripped the balustrade in a vain effort to steady himself.
She stood there, swollen with our child, begging me to leave with her before it was too late. And I believed the worst of her. I choked her with the Force.
As Luke's expression became horror-stricken, Anakin forged on.
I dueled with Obi-Wan. I was filled with hate and sought to kill him, but he had the higher ground. I was injured badly and burned in the molten lava. At the time I cursed him with every fiber of my being, but in truth I deserved every bit of agony and pain I have gone through.
He looked far away into the gathering gloom.
Sidious came and took me back to Coruscant, where he had me placed in this suit. I remembered little through the pain and the raging dark side, though I was sure that the last time I had felt Padme, she was still alive. But he told me that I had killed her, and when DNA tests confirmed that her body was indeed hers, I believed him. For 22 years, I believed him until I learned the name of the Force-sensitive rebel pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. Luke Skywalker.
He spoke the name as if it was the dearest, most treasured thing in the world.
You were so strong in the Force at carrying my old name. I knew immediately that you were my son. It was only then that I realized that Padme must have at least lived to deliver our child, but to this day I still don't know how she really died.
Anakin gave a bone-weary sigh.
I was utterly lost to the dark side for many years. It was only after Bespin, when I realized what I had done to you, to my own son, that my eyes were opened to the evil I had become.
He turned his masked head to look Luke straight in the eye.
You saved me, Luke. Vader is no more. I am Anakin Skywalker again.
And with that, just as he had done as Vader during their flight above Yavin 13, Anakin revealed himself and allowed Luke to see him as he truly was. Safely concealed deep within his impenetrable shields, Luke was astonished to discover a vast change in his father. The previously wild, all-consuming torrent of the dark side was now impressively controlled. And furthermore, it also existed alongside the light side in equal measure. The entire spectrum of the Force surged through the person who was so reminiscent of Darth Vader, and yet markedly different in every way. Luke could only attribute the transformation to the return of Anakin Skywalker. Neither Jedi nor Sith. He was a phenomenally powerful warrior with the Force truly as his ally. Anakin reformed his shields and drew the cloaking of Vader's characteristic darkness around himself again. His visible presence was still formidable, but not nearly as potent as he really was. His voice was loaded with painful remorse as he said,
I could not see what Padme and Obi-Wan had tried to tell me until it was much too late. As Vader, I have done terrible things, but what I did to my own family is the worst crime of all.
His gaze was drawn to Luke's right hand, concealed in a black glove, just like his own. First his angel, and now his son, the two most precious people in the galaxy, both having suffered because of him.
I am so sorry, Luke.
Luke's head was spinning. Barely half an hour ago, he'd known next to nothing about his father, and now he'd heard so much that he thought his head would explode. He had been considerably relieved to learn that it was in desperation to save his mother that his father had turned to the dark side, not for power or greed. But then moments later, he'd been horrified to discover that Anakin had choked his mother. And it was with some considerable guilt to find that he felt joy. Yes, it had been joy to be witness to Anakin Skywalker existing inside his father again. Not parted from the dark side, but he was certainly no longer a Sith. Luke could feel the incredible depth of love his father still carried for his mother, and the anguish at her loss that was still so raw after so many years. He could only imagine how passionately Anakin must have felt for her at the time. Luke was numb with his shock as he struggled to come to terms with all that he had heard. It was like the time after Bespin all over again. He was silent for so long that Anakin's anxieties bubbled over.
Say something, son,
he implored. Luke looked at him, his gaze troubled. He opened his mouth, closed it again. I don't know what to say, he said eventually. I don't know what to think. It's too soon. Anakin gave a long sigh. He felt utterly spent. Stepping away, he lowered himself heavily onto the ornate stone bench tucked by the wall beneath leafy vines. Where is my mother buried? Luke asked. Anakin replied quietly.
She is here, in Theed.
Here? Luke asked. She was from Naboo. A sorrowful, loving expression crossed Anakin's face inside the mask.
Oh, son, your mother wasn't just from Naboo. She was greatly loved by these people. She first served them as queen, then later as senator. Her public name was Padme Amidala.
Luke's jaw dropped in disbelief. Queen Amidala? My mother
was the Queen Amidala?
It was perhaps a year ago that Leia had told him of the young monarch of Naboo. They had been watching a HoloNet report that had allegedly discovered some evidence of Queen Calantha backing the last senator of the Conmel sector, Senator Naberi of Naboo, in hers and other senators' bids to prevent the Emperor from disbanding the Senate. And Luke had made the mistake of commenting that Calantha seemed to support her people despite apparently being loyal to the Empire. Leia had lectured him at length of the differences between Calantha and the democratically elected monarchs of the past, like Queen Amidala. One of the youngest queens ever elected, Amidala had earned great respect throughout the galaxy when she bravely fought off the illegal occupation of Naboo by the Trade Federation when the Republic failed to provide assistance. During this time, she also unified the segregated societies of Gungans and humans, and as senator, she had continued to dedicate her life to her people and was a staunch supporter of democracy until her premature death. Leia, one of the most dedicated advocates of social equality and the rights of all sentient life forms that he had ever known, had looked up to her.
We met when she was already queen, and I was but a slave,
Anakin said, his mind half casting back to his 9-year-old self. You were a slave? Luke repeated, again taken aback. Anakin nodded.
I was born into slavery. But that is another story for another day.
The shadows of the night had closed around them by now, and they both looked out into the gloom towards the distant specks of light from the scattered villages and villas surrounding the lakes. There's something I don't understand, Luke said after a while. How can you use both sides of the Force? How can you control the dark side?
I'm not sure myself, Anakin replied. Ever since I re-established my connection to the light side, I have been able to use and control both sides of the Force. I can't banish the dark side, but neither does it take over. Obi-Wan didn't seem to think it was a problem,
he said vaguely. For some reason, he was reluctant to mention the prophecy to his son. He still disagreed that he was the chosen one, and there was no point in getting Luke excited about it as well. Obi-Wan came to you? Luke asked as he sat down beside him.
Anakin smiled wryly. He kept calling me Anakin. That was when I realized I'd changed so much that I wasn't Vader anymore.
Does Palpatine know?
I certainly hope not. We should be safe for a while longer. The dark side still flows in me, so there would have been no major disruptions for him to detect, and any surge in the light could be due to you. But we must be careful,
he warned.
He is extremely powerful in the dark side and a master of precognition. Moreover, he will be plotting to ensnare you as his apprentice, to replace me.
Luke's countenance became that of serious focus and unyielding resolve. He won't succeed, he stated.
I know,
Anakin replied. He didn't care what happened to himself, but the thought of Luke ever being called Darth was nauseating. Silently, he vowed, I won't let him.
Luke,
he said, turning to his son,
I have done terrible, unforgivable things, and I know that you need time to think about what I told you. But can you believe that I am no longer Vader? That what I do now is for good?
Luke looked at him, seeing through the ominous mask to the man his father was inside. It was impossible to say whether he would ever come to terms with the evil committed by Darth Vader, but that was a separate issue. He had no doubt that Anakin had turned a new leaf. I believe you, he said. Anakin only realized he was holding his breath when he released it in relief, although it still weighed heavily on him that Luke might not be able to cope with his past and eventually reject him when the dust had settled. The fact that his son could believe that one small fact filled him with renewed strength. He took a moment to resettle his emotional equilibrium before rising to his feet.
Then we have work to do, he announced. I need to speak with the other Alliance representatives.
Luke immediately looked concerned. But we've been negotiating all day. The Jedi in him winced, knowing how much of a whine that was, but he had never been a politician, and the prospect of spending more hours in negotiation wasn't appealing. Anakin chuckled, a sound the vocalizer struggled with and emitted as something like a cough.
I hate to tell you this, but that was nothing but a travesty. This is where the real work begins. Now come, I will explain all.
And with that, the armored warrior lithely leapt up, grasped the overhanging vines, and began scaling them to make his way towards the east wing, which had been assigned to the Alliance delegates. With a weary sigh, Luke followed a moment later. Leia and Maydeen glanced up in surprise from the datapads they had been studying as Luke hurtled through the window, landing in a tight roll, then smoothly rising to his feet. They were alone in the room, without Chewbacca or a single guard. Luke swept the room with a force, ensuring they had complete privacy. Leia was watching him curiously. The door was closed, he explained feebly. Of course, she replied. She and Maydeen continued to watch as Luke hesitated, eyes flickering between them and the veranda doors several times.
Is there something you wish to say, Commander?
Maydeen asked. Visibly bracing himself, Luke said, Yes, sir. He walked to the doors, reached for the control switch, hesitated, then spun around to face them. I am about to do something which will seem rather insane. I ask that you hear the explanation before... He stopped himself. Well, warning you isn't going to help at all, so... Abruptly, he smacked a hand on the switch and the door slid open. The instant they saw Vader standing there, both Maydeen and Leia snatched at their blasters. Before they could fire, however, an invisible hand had ripped the weapons away and sent them soaring through the air towards Luke. Wait! He cried as he caught them. Face flushing red, Maydeen was already reaching for his comlink with one hand as he pushed Leia behind him with the other. However, the comlink too was torn from his grasp and went flying towards Luke, who placed it on the side table alongside the blasters.
What's the meaning of this?
Maydeen demanded angrily. Luke rushed in front of Vader, facing them with his hands raised in a placating gesture. Please, just listen! I brought him here for a reason! Leia stepped out from behind Maydeen and gave them a long, measured look as Vader's respirator hissed around them. Only her trust in Luke stayed her hand from reaching for her own comlink. An explanation would be appreciated, she said crisply, addressing Vader. Anakin took one step into the room, waved a hand to close the doors behind him, and swept the room with a force, as Luke had done.
Your Highness, General Maydeen, be assured I mean you no harm. I come with a warning and a proposition. Would you care to sit?
He gestured at the circular table and seated himself, aware that he would appear a shade less threatening if he wasn't towering over them. Luke sat a quarter of the way around the table, and with great weariness, Leia and Maydeen settled opposite Vader.
I bear you serious warning,
Vader said.
These peace negotiations are not genuine.
Maydeen was glaring at him.
We never thought it was,
he stated.
That is wise, Vader acknowledged, but I don't believe you are aware of the full extent of the plot. Palpatine is willing to go to any lengths to gain your trust. He would implement all the changes we discussed today, and more. He would reinstate the Senate, replace the regional governors with elective representatives, and return control of local Imperial forces to them. Rebel Alliance leaders would even be placed on the Imperial Ruling Council if necessary, and full elective powers will be restored to citizens. Whatever it takes, he will do.
Vader paused.
But ultimately, when he has discovered the location of every Alliance leader and resistance cell, he will override control over the Imperial forces and destroy you all.
There was a stunned silence. It was Leia who recovered first. You discussed these plans with him? She asked.
I suggested it,
Vader replied. Maydeen became a picture of rage, but she had anticipated such. So why are you warning us? She asked smoothly.
The Empire is wrong, he said frankly. A system of government where a sole individual has absolute authority will only lead to corruption and oppression. Power should be restored to the people.
She regarded him thoughtfully. You have been this Empire's chief enforcer for 2 decades, Lord Vader. Why should we believe you?
For personal reasons I will not divulge. I have come to see the error of my ways. Palpatine is evil. He should not be allowed to hold the lives of the galaxy's citizens in his hands. Call it a change of heart, if you will,
Vader said with a most uncharacteristic shrug. Just for argument's sake, let's say we believe you, she said. What is it that you propose? Anakin had been building up to this point for months now, and he forged ahead without preamble.
I will destroy Palpatine.
Maydeen began to splutter in disbelief, but Leia held out a hand to stay him, nodding at Vader to continue. Luke's brow creased in a frown, his expression grave.
When he is dead, there will be many amongst the Grand Moffs, Grand Admirals, and Imperial advisors who will wish to take over. Legally, I have right of succession, and I will assume temporary command, but only as a means to avoid fragmentation and further war. As the situation stabilizes, I will work with the Rebel Alliance to ensure smooth transition to a democratic system of government. Over time, I will relinquish all power entirely.
There was exactly 1 second of silence before Medine exploded.
We can see right through you, Vader,
he hissed, jabbing a finger towards him.
This farce of being on our side, pretending to work with us. It's obvious you're merely after power for yourself.
General! Leia interrupted with calm authority. She may have been young, but there was good reason why she was one of the Alliance's leaders. Medine held his tongue, although clearly still enraged. Leia coolly faced Vader. You understand that we find it difficult to take your word at face value, she said more diplomatically.
Of course, Vader said. And to that end, I have already made some peace offerings. I can give you the exact details of several donations the Alliance has received in the last few months, credit donations now totaling near to 8 billion credits, as well as 10 Nebulon B frigates.
He looked aside as if thinking to himself and mused.
That was a challenging endeavor to cover my tracks.
Medine looked extremely dubious.
You may also have heard of Varigno,
Vader continued. Leia was already aware of this, but she asked, for the record, Are you admitting to being the same Varigno who has secretly been aiding and recruiting for the Alliance for the last 4 months?
I am,
Vader confirmed.
Medine's gaze narrowed. We currently have an Imperial spy, maybe several infiltrating our ranks. You could have heard all this from them.
It was Vader who warned me about the Imperial fleet at Tabrawa, Luke said quietly from the side for the General's benefit. Although he had already discussed it with Leia, it would be news to the rest of High Command. Medine seemed torn between disbelief and stunned amazement.
My latest enterprise was most amusing, Vader continued. I'm sure you have seen it. The Freedom Chronicles?
Luke's jaw dropped. That was you? Anakin inclined his head in confirmation, the grin hidden behind the mask, but Luke easily sensed his amusement. That would explain it, Leia said. It made perfect sense in view of Vader being Varigno. She turned to Luke. Is he telling the truth? She asked, not bothering to be subtle about the question. En route, his father had only briefly mentioned that he wished to make a deal with the Alliance. Having only just heard the full details, he was still slightly astounded, but there was no denying the truth. I wouldn't have brought him here otherwise, Luke replied. She nodded. And you're facing off earlier today? She prompted.
Was just an act to fool Dangor, he finished. Vader suggested it.
Leia shot him a glance that seemed to say, I should have known. She turned back to Vader. We will give your proposition serious consideration. Before the official opening negotiations are adjourned, we will need the broad terms of any possible agreement to take back to the Alliance for discussion.
When my official presence will not be missed, Vader replied. I will come here as often as is possible to discuss it, but I cannot stress enough that we must not be seen talking. Dangor is a fanatic, insanely loyal to Palpatine, and will report everything. For the sake of maintaining our guise, the negotiations during the day must continue as if nothing is amiss.
Leia looked at him as if he had just insisted that Wookiees were hairy. We are the Rebel Alliance, Lord Vader. You need not tell us how to be discreet. Luke was trying and failing to smother a smile.
I stand corrected,
Vader conceded. She might have been willing to negotiate with him, but she was clearly uncomfortable at the prospect of sitting at the same table any longer than was strictly necessary. I believe we're done for today, she said, her tone final.
Indeed,
Vader confirmed before rising to his impressive height. Medine also stood, not out of civility, but so as to avoid being caught sitting down if the Dark Lord decided to attack. Vader nodded at Leia politely before departing through the veranda doors, making Medine shiver as the doors seemingly opened and closed behind him of their own accord. Luke had never been so adamant in his whole life. He had already considered whether this was the same rash stubbornness with which he had raced off to Bespin to save Han and Leia, and dismissed it. This time the Force was in full agreement. We'll do it together, he insisted yet again. It must have been the 5th time now. Luke had called to his father after all the delegates were supposedly asleep, and Anakin had snuck his way easily into the quarters assigned to his son. Raised in poverty on a moisture farm, Luke was uncomfortable with the same lavish decoration as seen throughout the palace, but he was presently far more preoccupied with other matters. He stared his father down, who was looking decidedly Vader-like at that moment as he towered over Luke with his arms crossed over his broad chest.
"This isn't your fight, Luke,"
Anakin replied. "Yes, it is! We all have a right to fight!"
"A right to fight, yes, but you also have a duty to future generations. You must survive. You are the last of the Jedi."
Luke didn't correct him on that last point. Instead, he said with emphasis, "We must survive. You can't do this alone, Father. If we face him together, it might just work." Caught up in their argument, neither of them heard the door slide open with the faintest hiss, and for reasons they couldn't understand, neither of them sensed the newcomer.
"No, Luke. He is too powerful. There's no knowing what might happen."
"Exactly!" Luke retorted. "That's why you need me there!"
"I won't allow you to be hurt,"
Anakin thundered with a pointing finger, his fear at the prospect making his tone harsher than he'd intended. Luke wasn't fazed in the slightest. "I won't allow you to die!" he countered with equal intensity. Anakin couldn't counter-respond and threw his arms up in the air.
"You might even be more stubborn than your mother,"
he said in equal exasperation and fondness. There was a pause. Then Luke said quietly, "I can't lose you, Father." Anakin took one look at his son, and the tension melted away. Wanting to reassure him, but not knowing how, he simply placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. It was at that moment that shock crashed into them through the Force, and they realized they were being watched. They spun towards the door on the other side of the room and were faced by Leia, her brown eyes startled and huge.